Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good evening from the Batcave. It is July 27th, 2021, and I am on day one of rebuilding my YouTube channel from scratch. I just kind of accepted, what happened as a strike is, okay, well, there's a lot of my content that the quality wasn't that great. There's a lot of it where maybe my attitude wasn't that great in delivery, and I just accepted it as a fresh chance to start over. So I'm going to be sorting through my videos and probably picking out the best ones, probably a lot of the shorter ones that are clearer. And then I'm going to go through some of my older content and see if I can revisit that and do that better. Like I want to go a little bit deeper in the logic versus rhetoric series, and I want to do more, I guess, debate analysis like I was doing earlier on, just to kind of teach people what this is really going to be about. And this is going to be my own growth path as I improve in this too, is really about apologetics and debate in the sense of trying to inform your opponent and educate your opponent versus trying to defeat your opponent. This is something I'm growing in, and this is something I want to educate other people on. So the logic versus rhetoric series is going to come back, but it's going to come back in a way that hopefully is going to be a kinder, gentler version of that. I just want to show you guys what I'm now doing. I now have my YouTube channel. But I am posting all my videos. So right now I posted a couple of these music video shorts that I did, if you guys remember that. Right now I'm posting this series and in tandem with the mid-trib proofs. So this should be about 5 parts, and I've got 5 of the mid-trib proofs, and I'm going to keep going, kind of tearing down the pre-trib and then building up the mid-trib. And then after that, I'll probably go back at the pre-wrath theory, because I'm going to probably do a lot of analysis of Chris White and Joel Richardson and Alan Kirshner. I think those are 3 of the main voices out there, so I'm probably going to be tearing apart their stuff. When I say tearing apart, don't take this as a personal attack on those guys. They're just, Chris White I really like. The other guys I can live without, but I mean, sometimes you can learn really good things from somebody and then you ultimately don't agree with their conclusion. And one of the things I want to do is, as I grow in being able to express what I don't agree with, is to do that in a way that is full of grace and seasoned with salt, and hopefully better equip other people to do that as well. So if you followed this channel, maybe you like my snarky, cynical kind of approach, and I'm repenting of that. I'm moving away from that and trusting in God that I don't have to be that way in order to get my point across. So anyways, I am building up a YouTube channel here. If you see that, what I got there, I am then going over to BitChute. I'm copying it over there. Odyssey is actually something that's pretty cool. They will sync your videos automatically. And I think Rumble will do that too. I just haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'm not positive, but I think you can do that. So basically I'm building up these profiles, and but what I'm doing is I'm setting these up to automatically share where they can. And then I think BitChute is the only one that I have to manually load. But probably anything that probably would get flagged on YouTube, now that I'm kind of learning my lesson here, I'm going to put on BitChute. So for instance, my WoW hypothesis, the War of the Worlds, is on there. And then the Dark Horse, the stuff that's along the lines of predictive programming, stuff that would fall into the conspiracy theory category, I'm probably just going to put on BitChute alone. Maybe I'll put it on Rumble and the others, but I probably just won't put that on YouTube anymore, and I'll stick to mostly theology, apologetics, and the kinder, gentler stuff on YouTube. So anyways, that's what I'm doing. Now that we're kind of through that introduction, I want to get back into Dr. Tommy Ice's paper on the Pre-Trib rapture, and just see if we can further kind of pick through this thing and debunketh it. I just don't think the Pre-Trib rapture holds water, and so I don't think it should hold any of your water either. But what we're going to do is we're going through his thesis. It's about a 10-page thesis, and we're just going right through it line by line, and we're picking it apart as we're just thinking through it. So we went through literal interpretation last time, and him defining what literal interpretation is and why he believes that brings you to a pre-trib rapture. And I talked about how literal interpretation does not work. We're going to talk now about premillennialism and futurism. and then the distinction between Israel and the church, which I think for the most part, I'm going to agree with these things, but they're going to be subtle distinctions that we're going to get into. So hopefully we're going to cover premillennialism and futurism here, and then save the distinction between Israel and the church for the next one. So starting with premillennialism, he says, the next biblical principle foundational to pre-tribulationism is premillennialism. Premillennialism teaches that the second advent will occur before Christ's 1,000-year reign upon the earth. It is contrasted with the postmillennial teaching that Christ will return after he reigns spiritually from his throne in heaven for a long period of time during the current age through the church, and a similar amillennial view that also advocates a present but pessimistic spiritual reign of Christ. Biblical premillennialism is a necessary foundation for the pre-trib position, since it is impossible for either the postmillennial or amillennial view of Scripture to support a pre-trib understanding of the rapture. This is kind of weird. It's just kind of unnecessary and out of place. Again, yes, you have to believe in a millennium to believe in a pre-trib. Well, no, you don't. You don't have to believe in a literal millennium to believe in a pre-trib rapture. You can believe it's amillennial, and then you can still believe in a pre-trib rapture, and Daniel's 70th week is just at the end of the amillennial millennium or the post-millennial millennium. There's nothing about that, is the only thing is premillennial means you're premillennial. It means you believe there's a millennium before or after Daniel's 70th week. If you're amillennial, it's not that you're discounting the existence of Daniel's 70th week or the eschaton. You're just saying that there's not a 1,000-year literal reign of Christ on the earth afterwards. So this is kind of arbitrary, and there's nothing premillennial that necessarily points you to the pre-trib rapture. So again, this is a PhD scholar. He's a leading, debater in this camp, but this is a nonsense statement. I don't know what to tell you about it. If somebody wants to comment and tell me how a premillennial position points you to a pre-trib rapture, or is even necessary to believe in a pre-trib rapture, please, I'd love to hear that in the comment section. But this just seems like an arbitrary piece of thing. It seems like what he's doing is trying to gather people who are premillennial into his pre-trib rapture camp and just make an arbitrary connection as if you're one of us if you're premillennial, and that's just not true. There's just no substance there. So the next one he says is futurism, and future is basically future eschatology versus stuff fulfilled in 70 AD. Okay, so the third contributing principle is futurism. As if understanding the different millennial positions are not complicated enough, diversification is compounded when we consider the four possible views that relate to the timing of when an interpreter sees prophecy being fulfilled in history. The four views are simple in the sense that they reflect only four possibilities in Revelation to time past, present, future, and timeless. The preterist past believes that most, if not all, prophecy has already been fulfilled, usually in relation to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The historicist present sees most of the current church age as equal to the tribulation period. Thus, prophecy has been and will be fulfilled throughout the current church age. Future believe that virtually all prophetic events will not occur in the current church age. This is not true. I'm a futurist. I believe this church age, if you will, is lots of things in the book of Revelation occur in the church age. So I don't know where he comes up with that. That's arbitrary. And then the idealist, timeless position does not know either that the Bible indicates the timing of the events that we know before they happen. Therefore, the idealists think that the prophetic passages mainly teach great ideas or truth about God to be applied regardless of timing. Pre-tribulationism can only be built upon the futurist understanding of prophetic events. Such a conclusion is the result of the application that a consistent literal interpretation of prophecy as future historical events that are yet to occur. And I'm going to partially agree with this statement. Basically, he's saying you can't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture unless you believe in future eschatological fulfillment, because that would mean that the tribulation is in the future. Okay, so we can't be raptured before that if it's something that's already occurred in the past. I'm going to agree with that statement. I'm just going to pick apart this a little bit. And here's the thing. The preterists, that's right, preterists believe that everything was fulfilled in 70 AD. And if you read Jesus's statements in Luke 21 and Matthew 24 and Mark 13, they do have things that resonate with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but are ultimately about Christ's second coming, which every single passage makes clear. So obviously Christ didn't come in 70 AD, and there wasn't a resurrection of the dead and a rapture in 78 AD. So we know that the preterist position fails. However, you still can look at that preterist position as being not completely nonsense, but a partial fulfillment of what would ultimately come afterwards. And if you guys saw what we covered in the prophecy given to Ahaz about the virgin birth, that kind of thing is proven to be biblically sound as a interpretive methodology. Something can be partially fulfilled in the immediate generation, and that's how they know this is a legit prophet. And so they save his writings, because the more complete fulfillment of that thing is going to happen later on. And this is just common sense. How would you know to keep a prophet's writings if the stuff that he said never came to pass? How would you know? So you have to have stuff that comes to pass pretty soon after that prophet, so they know to save his writings, and then stuff that, you know, is ultimate and later on. And that's why we have the prophets that we have in Scripture. Every single one of the prophets, I think you could argue, had stuff that happened in their immediate generation, and then stuff in their prophecies that also spoke to things in the eschaton or in Christ's first coming. So typically everybody is prophesying about the first and second coming of Christ. And then there's things that are going to happen in that immediate generation that are going to speak to that. That goes for, I can't think of a prophet that doesn't qualify them. So I'm going to say that the preterist position is definitely wrong, but there is some validity to their reasoning. So if you guys are talking to preterists, make sure you acknowledge the validity of their reasoning, but then take them to the Ahaz passage and show them that, hey, this is a partial fulfillment. There's also a more complete literal fulfillment. And that's why we're not completely invalidating the preterist position, but we're joining it with the futurist position to have an already not yet position that honors both positions, okay? So the historicist position is kind of weird, and this is where you're going to get people who start getting into things like Anglo-Israelism, or trying to say that, you know, the lion in Daniel's prophecy is England and the bear is Russia and stuff like that, because what these guys are doing is they're either saying that these prophetic things keep repeating themselves, or they just try to apply it to their modern context. And that's where you get people saying, you know, ISIS is the Antichrist, Saddam Hussein's the Antichrist, and whoever, you know, Barack Obama's the Antichrist, blah, blah, blah. Because they're really applying a historicist position, which is that you can take these things and apply them over and over and over again in history, because it's not something that necessarily has a direct and ultimate fulfillment that it's pointing to. And that's just not really true. There are patterns in history, but they're like major cycles, like, you know, 70 AD and Daniel's. I mean, the destruction of Jerusalem has happened twice in history, and it's going to happen a third time in the last days. You could argue that Ephraim the Syrian, if you ever read his writings, he was writing on the cusp of Parthia and Rome going to war, which were two major empires that kind of were like the kings of the East and the Antichrist Empire. And so he sees things there that are similar to the eschaton, because he understands the eschaton, and this is similar, you know. I mean, you're really going to see probably the border between Turkey and Iran be the borderline between the kings of the East, because that's closest to where the Euphrates River is. But again, that's the historicist position, and it's really just a sloppy position. This is where you're going to get Seventh-day Adventism out of here too, where they start to say that the 1200 1260 years or whatever, 1290 years that the woman's in the wilderness is the church leading up to Napoleon, and there's just weird stuff like that. And it just doesn't work out if you try to meet out the whole thing. Or they'll say the 10 kingdoms are these 10 obscure proto-European nations that existed somewhere between the Roman Empire and the more modern, or even the Middle Ages, European kingdoms, like these Burgundians and the Visigoths and stuff like that. And it's just like, if the history itself is that obscure, do you really think that's the fulfillment of Bible prophecy? So again, there's things like that they tend to be ethnocentric, they tend to be European-centric, and that's why the historicist position falls apart, okay? Futurists, they do believe that virtually all prophetic events will not occur in the current church age, and that's just not true. See, what he is doing is he's assuming that futurists are pre-tribulational, okay? Pre-tribulationists believe this, but if you are a futurist, which I am, you still hold to like Israel coming back as a nation in the 1940s. Well, that's in the past, but it's, would have been considered a futurist position at the time that Darby wrote dispensationalism, because they were predicting a rebirth of Israel. Okay, there's things like the Gog-Magog invasion that I believe happened before Daniel's 70th week. All these things, I believe everything up until Revelation 6, with the blood, sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood, happens during, if you, what you might call the church age, or during the ingathering of the Gentiles. That's, you know, they use the term church age. I don't like that term. I like the term the ingathering of the Gentiles, because it's after the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then all of Israel will be saved. Okay, and so I like that term, because the fullness of the Gentiles coming in, I believe, ultimately ends with a rapture at the mid-trib, and then the remnant of Israel that believes are going to be saved. But I believe everyone, you know, well, I shouldn't say everyone that's going to believe believes by that time, but yeah, again, that church age, I don't believe ends till like half the book of Revelation is over. Okay, so I'm a futurist. I believe these things are future fulfilled and not in the past, not historically. But I don't believe that it's after the church age. Again, the church age is an arbitrary term that was kind of invented by dispensationalists, and it really, some of them will argue it began at Pentecost. Some of them will argue it began with Paul's teachings, and then they'll say that it ends with a rapture. And I just, you know, I would kind of say, yeah, if you have to call it a church age, I would say it ends with a rapture, but it doesn't certainly end before all these future prophecies are fulfilled, because I think there's tons of prophecies. If you watch my videos, things in Isaiah, things in Jeremiah, things in Micah, things in the book of Revelation, just tons and tons, things in Zechariah that are being fulfilled as we speak, but I'm still a futurist because I don't believe these things were fulfilled back in the past. So again, he is reading in his own conclusion into his definition of term, futurists. And again, this is, you can be a PhD scholar and still not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, okay? You just got to spend a lot of time in school, basically. And then he says, but this will lead to the future tribulation. Okay, so it says, but will happen in the future tribulation. So notice he's distinguishing between the church age and the tribulation as if they're distinct. And so he's eisegeting in the pre-tribulational position into his definition of what the church age is and what a futurist is, okay? So this is just bad logic, okay? Because again, if you were to ask somebody in the pre-wrath camp, somebody in the post-tribulational camp, and somebody in the mid-tribulational camp, if they're a futurist, they're all going to say yes. But he's reading in, he's eisegeting in the pre-trib position into what it means to be a futurist, and that's just dumb. I'm sorry. It's not, it's illogical. It's a fallacy. So, and then of course the idealist, these are the kind of people who are going to take the things in the book of Revelation and they're going to look at them allegorically for what God is teaching in terms of hard issues or spiritual issues in the world. And again, this is not a completely invalid position either, because God uses the unfolding of historical and prophetic events to teach moral and spiritual lessons. So the idealist position is not invalid either. So again, if I were to tell you which one of these positions I am, I would say I'm primarily a futurist, but I would say all of them have some validity to them. If you really understand Bible prophecy and how the manifold, remember the Bible talks about the manifold wisdom of God. That means the many folded over wisdom of God. God's doing multiple things, and this is an old interpretive methodology that's been around for a while. Origen kind of defined it a lot, but he took it way too far in too many directions, and quite frankly, he kind of went crazy, and a lot of that had to do with pride and things like that. And I'm not even going to say that Origen wasn't saved. I'm just going to say, I mean, here's a guy with a big intelligence, a lot of isolation, and a lot of time to read and write, and he was a prolific writer. And I think if you leave anyone alone enough with the some bad fruit in there, they can come up with a lot of bad ideas. And the problem is you write that down and your stuff gets published. What did you really believe when you died? And, did you negate, beliefs that were true? And I'm going to lean towards believing Origen was saved, but he had some heretical ideas. Again, a heretic, the whole idea of somebody being a heretic, in the sense that we call somebody a heretic, that just means they have an idea that diverges from the apostolic teaching, and they're being divisive with that idea. That's what a heretic is. And so most of your denominations would technically be considered heresies on the basis of what Scripture defines as heresy. Heresies, schisms, you'll find that interpretation in the book of Corinthians when he says, I see that there are divisions among you, or schisms among you. It's a heresy. That's what a heresy is. It's a division based on an alternative standard or doctrine or rule. And he would say, warn a heretic in the King James Version, and then some of your modern translations are going to say, warn a divisive person. Well, they're both kind of true definitions, because a heretic is somebody who really comes up with a new doctrine or a distinction in between a doctrine from what was handed down by the apostles, and then tries to draw people after himself. Okay, so that's what a heretic is. Unfortunately, the modern Christian position has kind of said, well, no, you can have all these divisions and distinctions that are gross. And I mean, like Calvinism is definitely a heresy. It's definitely a heresy in the sense that it's divisive. It tries to, put the Christians who are in versus the Christians who are out, or the Christians who are mature and the Christians who aren't. The Pentecostal doctrine that everyone speaks in tongues, that's a heresy. And I mean, you can just go through all these denominations and they're all the byproduct of heresy. The problem is, until we sort out what the biblical position is, they might say we're a heresy, and we might say they're a heresy, because we're all kind of working backwards from the Reformation and sorting our way back to the apostolic teaching. Okay, so the reality is the word heresy should be used a lot more commonly, and it should be used, in its clear biblical definition, so that we can say, yeah, that's a heresy. Doesn't necessarily mean the person who's doing it is a hardcore false prophet. They might just be an error. And the difference between a heretic, where it says, after warn a heretic, or, have nothing to do with a heretic, or after this person's second admonition, is when you bring the scriptural proofs by 2 or 3 witnesses to that person, and they dig their heels in and say, no, I'm going to believe this anyways. Sadly, most denominational Christians are going to do that. I can sit down with a Baptist pastor who I have recently, who's honestly a pretty solid guy overall. He's leading people to the Lord. I could tell his heart's for the Lord, but his group believes a heresy, which is that the gifts have ceased today. And when I say, hey, can I put all the scriptural evidence in front of you to say that's not true? He says he doesn't want to look at it. I mean, he's not responding, So by biblical definitions, if we were in a church and he was holding that position, and I've got the 2 or 3 witnesses to prove it, he would be considered a heretic that you'd have nothing to do with. The problem is, in his denomination, he's in the majority viewpoint, and I'd be considered a heretic. And that's the problem with denominations. And Christ is going to eliminate all those denominations, and we're going to get down to what is or isn't a heresy based on just the word and the Spirit. The Spirit's going to build up what's true and tear down what's not. So anyways, I wanted to get to that point because he's taking the definition of futurist, and he's basically saying, by his definition of futurist, you must be pre-trib, and that's not true. If you really understand what he's saying here, that sees much of the current church age as historical is equal to the tribulation period, but the futurists believe that virtually all prophetic events will not occur in the current church age, but will happen in the future tribulation. See, he is making a futurist pre-tribulational, because he's saying all these things will not happen in the church age, but in the tribulation. Which means, well, the church age ends with the rapture, and then the tribulation begins, and that makes you pre-trib. So again, this is something that you're going to have bad theologians do often. They're going to corner you with terms that aren't necessarily biblical terms, and then define those terms to direct your logic towards their conclusion. And that's just not honest with language. It's not honest with reasoning, and certainly not honest with the scriptures. So a lot of people are trained to do this, and it works for them. This is why I'm big on logic versus rhetoric, because rhetorically it works. Logically it doesn't. So these tactics work on people because they're like, oh yeah, that's true. And it's just, what you're really doing is you're just rolling over people with bad logic and trying to make them feel like, in order to belong, you have to think like this. That's really what you're doing, because you're appealing to futurists as a group, which, most people who don't put themselves in the preterist, historicist, or idealist camp would say, well, yeah, I'm a futurist. I believe in literal future prophecy. And what he's doing is then saying, he's throwing up a smoke screen to deceive a person into thinking, well, then you have to be pre-trib, because logically, futurist believes that most of these events happen in a future tribulation after the church age, which is not true. That's not a definition of futurism. So that's why it's important to just define your terms. If you're going to use a futurist, what is a futurist? A futurist is somebody who believes, the biblical eschaton is a future thing, that the book of Revelation is primarily dealing with a future thing, and that there's a lot of unfulfilled prophecy to be fulfilled in the future in both the Old and New Testament. That's it. That's what a futurist is, okay? So don't be deceived by these things. Make sure these people define their terms. And then I think I'm going to quit there, because I want to get into the Israel and the church thing in another video, and try to be more succinct with that as well. Israel and the church is going to be a kind of big deal. Okay, so we'll get to that next, and then we'll get into his actual pre-tribulation arguments once we define this. So right there, we've gotten into in the last video. If you watch the literal interpretation, it doesn't hold water. That form of interpretation doesn't hold water. Premillennialism, you know, again, I agree with, but it certainly doesn't point to a pre-trib rapture, nor does the pre-trib rapture need a premillennial position to exist. You can have an amillennial position and still believe in a rapture before Daniel's 70th week. You could just have Daniel's 70th week be equivalent to the Gog-Magog invasion at the end of the millennial period, which is what amillennialists do. If you know their stuff, they just say that Satan rising at the end of the millennium in Revelation chapter 20 to deceive the earth is the tribulation. And so they'll put, you know, what we'll consider the tribulation or Daniel's 70th week there, and the abomination, desolation, and all this stuff, but they'll say that's Gog-Magog rising at the end. And that actually works really well with the pre-wrath position, Joel Richardson's position, and Chris White's position. So we'll get into all those positions in later videos, but just remember, premillennialism is not necessary to believe pre-trib, nor is pre-trib point to premillennialism any more than any other futurist position does. Okay. And then futurism, we just covered that in detail, so I hope you guys get that. So again, this is where we're going. You just got to think logically. If you guys have questions, again, you guys, I'm rebuilding a channel from scratch, so if you could share, like, and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. I am trying to get my Revelation book out there, which I think is going to be a blessing to the church when it gets popular. And then, like I said, help promote the channel, share, like, and subscribe if you're watching this. And then let me know in the comment section, am I saying this stuff clearly? Do you have questions? And I would say this, if you're on here and you want to debate, I would say this isn't the place for that. I would say if you have questions and those questions are so thorough, it's going to require maybe a video or a debate to get through it. I'd be happy to do a Zoom with you and just go over these things, just because I want to learn from you, and I hope you want to learn from me. But the comment section is more there for Q&A. It's not really there for, you know, in my hope, at least, it's not there for it's not there for debate or for somebody to say, you're wrong, here's my position, or here's what I think you're thinking, or here's what I think you're assuming. Honestly, I think my channel may have gotten pulled by a guy who reported me from the comments in the last video. I told him that his comments were in my video, and the next day my channel was deleted. And it wouldn't shock me if that guy came here thinking he was going to see Nicolas Cage's Left Behind movie, and he didn't, and he found himself in a debate with me, and he didn't like that, and then reported my channel. Maybe he didn't, I don't know, but the coincidence of the timing, considering all the, you know, crazy stuff that I put on there, and the fact that I only have 250 subscribers is kind of coincidental, I thought. So hopefully you didn't do it, but if you did, God bless you. I forgive you. You know, I look at it as an opportunity to do better in the Lord, and maybe I wasn't doing so great. So hope you come back and ask questions in a way that is productive and, you know, not combative, or, you know, not resorting to things like trying to get my channel deleted, because that's just weak sauce. And I hope you guys are blessed by this, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.